Well, here we are again. It's the Wandering Jew and the Practicing Jew, the Practicing Jew and the Wandering Jew. Rabbi Levi Cunin is obviously the Practicing Jew, and I'm Michael E. Gerber, the Wandering Jew. And here we are to have our little dialogue that we have hopefully every morning at 8 o'clock California time. I trust you're enjoying it, and if not enjoying it, being aggravated by it. And if you're not being aggravated by it, insensate to whatever's going on between us. We only have 20 minutes to get to the heart of the matter. So I'm going to start with Rabbi Levi Cunin and ask him to say hello.
Hello, Rabbi. Good to see you. And
hello, Rabbi. How are you?
Thank God I'm doing well. It's I forgot how many days now we're in quarantine, but it's definitely a huge transition for all of us. And every day I know that my friends are still alive and they're well. It makes me feel very good. And unfortunately, it's not always like that. So it's good to see you, and it's good to be here.
Good to see you. So we started a conversation a couple of days ago about anxiety, and you invited me to a conversation you were having with a gentleman by the name of Jim, I believe his name is.
Yeah.
And about the subject of anxiety and how Torah speaks to anxiety. And once we begin the study of Torah, that will alleviate the anxiety we feel as a lingering sensation that bothers us, but we know not the source. I still don't believe we've gotten to it. So if you would, please, let's address that again. And please attempt to do it differently than you did yesterday and than you did the day before yesterday.
I appreciate that. So
let me say, I'm sorry. Let me say that the thought came to me that essentially what you said, were we to enter into the study of Torah, we would come into relationship with Hashem, with God. And in the process, we would discover within Torah the connection that is missing, which, because it's missing, is creating the anxiety that we feel. So you're essentially saying, I believe, and correct me please, that it's our disconnect from Hashem that creates the anxiety.
Well, I actually, that's true, but I put it into other words. I said it's our disconnect from our truer narrative, and it's our connection to a narrative that we made up in our heads.
Yes.
And that's where anxiety comes from.
I got it. And the narrative is?
So there, I want to share with you from a different angle, as you requested. I will tell you about the story about this woman who she wakes up 2 o'clock in the morning, and her husband's walking back and forth in his apartment, back and forth. She says, "Honey, why can't you sleep?" He says, "You remember the neighbor from downstairs, right? But that lives right below us, Yankel?" She says, "Yeah." She says, "I owe him $100,000. She says, "Yeah." "And it's due tomorrow." She says, "Yeah." And he says, "And I don't have any of it. And I don't know what to tell him." So she walks over to the window, she pulls up the window, she screams out, "Yankel!" And finally, 2 o'clock in the morning, Yankel wakes up and says, "You know the money my husband owes you? Yeah, he doesn't have it. He's not gonna be able to give it back to you tomorrow." And she slams the window, she says, "Now let him not sleep, you go to sleep." Talking about anxiety. So here's the deal. One of the things that Hasidus, specifically Hasidus in the esoteric teachings, lend to us or give to us is an amazing experience.
I'm sorry, your sound just decreased.
One of the matters that Hasidism opens up our minds to is very much to the psychological, physiological element of who we are. And I'll explain that in a minute. There's a reason for it, because it's used as a metaphor, but because of that, we learn so much about how we operate. Let me give you an example. I think every one of us have something in our lives that was at one point something we were doing, we didn't like it, we wanted to let go, we struggled with it, and then one day we made a decision, that's it, it's over with. For some people, it'll be alcohol. For other people, it will be something else. There's it's not just the addictions that are famous. Everybody has their things that they, at one point in their life, dropped. Almost everybody. What's the process of that? How did that happen? How was it that just over the last who knows how many years? I remember myself when I used to smoke cigarettes, and it was many years ago, and I struggled. I would go off, I'd go on, I'd go off, I'd go on. Something happened. I don't want to get into that story, but something happened that, boom, it was over with. I'm not doing that anymore. What happened? What changed? Yesterday I liked it, today I can't take the smell of it. What changed? So when we look at the way that we operate, the Kabbalah and Hasidism enlighten us to a map of the soul of the human being. And it's a map that, what I mean by that is, if you were to look at it and learn it and study it and internalize it, and you and I have spoken about it many times in different relationships with other matters, but it's a map of how we operate. In short, first there's our will, intelligence, emotions, behavior. That's who we are. We have a will that drives us, and then there's an intelligence, there's emotions, and there's behavior. And what happens is that naturally we all want what's good for us. And therefore, we're not thinking about the system of how it operates, we're just living within it. So if our intelligence tells us, intelligence doesn't mean smart, by the way. In this case, a person's intelligence can be driven by the sickest things, because their will is driving it, and their will is aligned with their animal. But the intelligence is what's telling you whether you should be doing something or not. There's something that you could learn about in the teachings of Chassidus that explain how it works. That, for example, let's just use a smoker, for example. So a smoker has struggling not to smoke, and then suddenly, boom, there's an idea that went off, a brand new idea, something that was different than any of the other thoughts that the person had before, that now it's a seed. There's a process of development of that idea. If this, then that. If this, then that. Oh, really? The chances become this, and the chances become that, and this disease, and that's whatever the person's conversation is. And at some point, the most important component of the human being is activated. In Hebrew, it's called da'as. It means to know. And to know means not just to know. To know means, aha. Now I know. I'm not picking that thing up again. I'm not interested in that matter again. Whatever it was that we had that epiphany. So from the time the epiphany occurs until it becomes I know, where I feel it, where it's my life, where it's everything about me, there's a process to it. And unfortunately, most human beings don't activate this process in a healthy way, and therefore, and I say this is not true. This is true about religious, not religious. That's not. It's a. Unfortunately, we don't use the potential who we are as human beings, but we have this within us. So what I'm saying is, it is what we know today, based on a conversation that came through our lives and our stories, that creates that anxiety. It's because that is what today we know. But by inviting yourself into a different conversation, being able to observe it in a different way, suddenly that which a moment ago brought anxiety, today doesn't exist anymore. And that's the process of a healthy form of internalizing information.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is that the conversation that one gains in learning these teachings is the conversation of knowing.
So I understand that. I've had the experience of that. On January 3rd, 2011, in mid-afternoon, I quit drinking. I'd been drinking maybe a quart of very expensive alcohol a month. And always when I came home at night, I didn't drink during the day. But I came home at night and I would go into this, I'll call it that fog that the alcohol created in me. And on January 3rd, 2011, I quit. Something I've been doing for years and years and years. It never even entered my mind that I should quit. But on January 3rd, 2011, it not only entered my mind, I knew I was done with it. The same thing happened with smoking at the age of 32. I'd been smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day. One day I knew and I quit. Never to smoke again, never to drink again. So I absolutely know what you're talking about because it wasn't a thought process I went through. I didn't sit down and figure it out. I didn't write it out. I didn't journal it. I didn't meditate on it. It just struck me and I knew. And there was no question about whether I was going to do it or not. So I quit something that was a habit, deep, deep habit. And I've never questioned why I did it. I knew why I did it. That it controlled me. And I was done with it. So you're describing an experience that I've had. Now let's bring it to this conversation. Because in those cases, I was engaged in something that had a physically negative impact on me, a psychologically negative impact on me, et cetera, and so forth. And so I got rid of it. But in this case, it's not that I have a habit. It may not be. It may be. I don't think of it that way. I'm not a practicing Jew. I've never been a practicing Jew. I've never been called to be a practicing Jew. I've called to be more awake than I am. And I've been called by this and called by that and called by the other thing, but they really weren't callings. They were just influences in my life at that particular point in time because somebody said and somebody did, and I became interested in then and so forth, but it wasn't a calling. So please relate my experience. I have the definitive experience of that. I knew it. I did it. In regard to the conversation we're having here.
So that's
how does a wandering Jew become a practicing Jew when there's nothing compelling me to do it?
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing your story. When you say that there's nothing compelling, we're talking about people's lives being controlled by their fears and their anxieties, And the point that I'm saying is that as much as one is addicted to one thing, there's an addiction to a conversation, to a narrative of how we understand things. In other words, there's a part within us, if we don't operate the way I just mentioned to you, the other part within us is what's driving us is just what makes me feel, how it makes me feel good at this very minute. But I think when we get to these moments where we're kind of pushed into finding a deeper answer because anxiety doesn't feel good, as an example, I'm suggesting to you that if you want to have the happiness and the joy that a human being is capable of, then there's a system in which you operate, and it begins with wisdom. It begins with true wisdom. It begins with keeping your fountain clean with true flowing wisdom going inside of you. Because that wisdom will address all other matters as you get into that wisdom and as you internalize it and as you understand it. And then suddenly, boom, there's that change in the way of thinking, in the way of response. I'll give you just one example. This is a big one, okay? One of the things that you learn about in Hasidus is that it's impossible. This is from the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov says that when you see negativity in another person, you should know that the only reason why you could see it is because it exists in you, albeit maybe on a different level, but meaning a different amount, but it exists in you. And not only that, you should also, if you are connected to the conversation of the Torah, you would be aware that actually it was the divine frequency, the divine providence that placed that person before you so that you should be able to see a deficiency of your own, which otherwise, because of your self-love that we all have, we are incapable of seeing our shortcomings. So the great creator of the universe in its infinite, wondrous ways places that event before you. So you could see it, you could acknowledge it inside yourself, find it, and see how you could correct it and become an even better person than you are already. Now, imagine the moment, the transformative moment, that the last time you saw this person, they brought out all the ugliest feelings of how much you just don't want to see that person. But this time, you got a crackle thinking, oh, really? How do I have that in me? How could I possibly have that in me? Suddenly, your conversation changed. Suddenly, it's not about your resentment towards that person and every blah, blah, blah. Suddenly, that was your old knowing, how you knew things because of like the animalistic part of who we are, the natural part of who we are. But this conversation has changed my life, completely changed my life. When I got more into the depth of it, it's like a wondrous. It's almost like a joke. Not all the time, but it's almost like a joke. It's like, I'm not kidding. It's like, one person, I'll give you, I see it, once I see it in myself also, I see it in others also. So remember a long time ago, one time by the food time, one guy comes over to me, he's complaining how much food this other guy takes. I couldn't stop laughing because I always thought this guy was the biggest eater of all the people, the guy complaining. So if you take this thought and start looking at it and start observing when people complain about other people, you'll hear, if you take this one, you realize what they're really agitated is about that which exists within them. It completely changes the event. It changes the knowing of it. It transforms the way in which we're present. That's one example I could share with you. And we're holding already 20 minutes, so just want to give you the heads up.
Yes, here we are. So, Levi, thank you for that. There's only one way to tell, and that would be to become a practicing Jew.
Even just a little bit of learning, a little bit of that, like it doesn't mean that it's not like it's not an all or nothing thing. It's a relationship. Think of it as a personal relationship. Forget the practicing Jew for a moment. Think of it as developing your own personal relationship with Hashem. Hashem wants you. Hashem wants your relationship. Hashem wants it so deeply, even if it's just one mitzvah. Hashem wants it and is ready to reciprocate the feeling of a real relationship back with those who engage in that. Try it. If it's authentic, you'll see it for yourself. You'll feel it for yourself, But you can't do it without initiating a relationship. That can't just be in the mind. There's behaviors to a relationship. And the same is also true because we're human beings. There's behaviors to our relationship with our Maker. So.
Got it. Well, everybody, there's no denying it that my resistance to this is stronger than I imagined. The reluctance to doing it even just a little bit truly astonishes me. And we'll come back to talking about a little bit on Sunday. And today is Friday. And I wish everybody Shabbat Shalom. Rabbi Cunin.
Shabbat Shalom to everybody. And, just so to conclude with, take the most important thing about being a practicing Jew is taking a moment and doing an act of goodness and kindness for somebody else. And that's how it all begins. It's that simple. So Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.